Up appropriately dressed. I'm very, very impressed and very, very pleased. At this time, I'd like to introduce Professor Clint Rappoe, who is responsible for this august meeting today, and he will introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Rappoe.
I'll give you one of my corny jokes. I thought it was October. That's known as a rap hole joke. Good morning. And welcome to the 8th annual and the 11th speaker of the Eric Hilton Distinguished Chair Alumni Series, inaugurated in 1999. My name is Clint Rappoe, and I am pleased to let you know I have been here for 35 years at the Conrad and Hilton College of Hotel and Restaurant Management and the University of Houston. I am a professor emeritus. Now, some of you may know what a professor emeritus is, and some of you don't. So I'm going to share with you what that means for those of you who don't know. Emeritus, of course, is Latin. The E stands for to go. Emeritus, deserves. You put them together, deserves to go. But here I am. But we're ready to go. And I would like to announce also an informal session this afternoon at Barron's from 2 to 3:30. If you would, if you're interested in getting to know Mr. Rockett a little more up close and informally, and he is a nice person, you would enjoy it immensely. So put today 2 to 3:30 in Barron's. Feel free to come in early and leave late, or feel free to come in late and leave early. Refreshments will be available. I would also like to thank 3 people for all the work that needs to be done and all the work that has been done. A hearty thank you to Wendy Gary, who is not with us today, but thank you very much, Mrs. Gary, Shannon Burnett, who's done an immense amount of work, and Jennifer Potts. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your help. I would also like to introduce 5, I believe it is, the 6 may come in late, 5 former Distinguished Chair, Eric Hilton Distinguished Chair lecturers. I have them listed in alphabetical order, and I would like them to stand as I introduce them, but please hold your applause until they all stand. Mr. Marty Breverman, Mr. David Chagg, Mr. Nick Massad, Dorothy Nicholson, and Chuck Warzak. Thank you very much for being with us. And to let you know how far they've come, 2, of course, have come from Houston. And Mr. Warzak comes from Baltimore, Maryland. David Chagg comes from Brookline, Massachusetts, from the Country Club. And Marty Breverman comes from California, the Southern California. So thank you again so much for being with us. And Felice Jarvis may come in late, and Mr. Schultz has saved a seat for her. At this time, I would like to turn the program over to Mr. Nick Massad, the 73 chairman, 1973 graduate of the college and chairman of Eric's Club. Mr. Massad.
Thank you, Dr. Rappoe. I just want to take a minute to share with you a little bit about endowed chairs, give you some background on endowed chairs. You know, our college was initially funded, by the Hilton Foundation with a grant from Conrad Hilton in 1969. But in 1982, there was a very large grant given to the college by the Hilton Foundation, and it was over $21 million. It was given over a 10-year period from 82 to 92. Many things were provided by this grant, including 4 endowments. And this was provided to our college. The first one was the Conrad Hilton Endowed Chair. That today is held by Dr. Ron Nykiel. The second was the Baron Hilton Endowed Chair, and the current holder of that is Dean John Bowen. The Eric Hilton Endowed Chair, the very first recipient of that was Dr. Clinton Rappole. And there's also the Don Hubbs Professorship that is held by Dr. Stowe Shoemaker. The college has also had recent success with the addition of a fifth, and that is the Specs Charitable Foundation Professorship held by Jana Abbott. And now the sixth, the Clinton L. Rappole Endowed Chair, which was generously initially funded by one of our Eric Hilton lecturers and a graduate of our college, Miss Dorothy Nicholson. Dorothy? This is a very important endowed chair for all of us old guys that were here, guys and girls that were here a long time ago. I graduated from this college in '73 and took many classes with our friend Dr. Rappole in those days, and since then my wife and I were married, had 3 children, and all 3 of those children went through this program taking classes under Dr. Rappole. So extremely excited about this new chair, the Clinton L. Rappole Endowed Chair. It was very generously funded, as I say, by Dorothy Nicholson. We're now adding to it. There was a match from the Hilton Foundation and some from the university, where that endowment is now over $500,000 already and headed towards $1 million. So thank everyone for their efforts on that, particularly John Schultz and the others on the development team. What exactly is an endowed chair, and what does it do for the college? First and foremost, an endowed chair assists the college in recruiting outstanding faculty to come to our college. It provides the opportunity to develop a standard of excellence in the college that can't be achieved just through credit hour generation and state funds. State funds just don't provide the amount of the education that it did before. I think when I went to school here, state funds, accounted for probably 70% of the college's money, and today it's somewhere in the 30% range. So, the college has to raise a lot of money on its own. It's also kind of a way of keeping score with other hotel colleges around the country, like Cornell, UNLV, and the others, how many endowed chairs you have and the quality of those chairs. But it does attract, a great faculty to your college. So it's kind of a way of keeping score, and it provides salary benefits and other things to professors to enhance the whole program. I mention all of this to you to make you aware of how fortunate we are to be such a young college and have so many endowed chairs. It's very important, though, that we continue to fund them and that we continue to add more endowed chairs as time goes on. It's very important, each and every one of you. The value of your degree is what's going to carry you throughout your career. So the more that we can do, particularly when we get out of school, and that's what this club is all about, is bringing graduates back to the college to help support the college who have been out at least 20 years to come into the lecture series with us. So you may very well at some point have the ability to provide an endowed chair or add to one of the existing chairs or influence someone that you're working for. When you get out of school and go to work for that big company, you may be able to influence someone to provide an endowed chair to the college. So please make it one of your personal goals as you grow in your career, and I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Again, thank you all very much for being here this morning. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to introduce one of our own. For me, upon graduation in 1986, he embarked on a career as a tourism and hospitality consultant with various accounting firms. This career path afforded international postings in Barcelona, Lisbon, and London. Gregg's previous experience also includes 9 years with the Hotel Development Group of Marriott International from 1995 to 2004. While based in Madrid for 3 years, he led the expansion efforts in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, and prior to that he was based in Washington, D.C., as Director of Feasibility and Market Analysis in Latin America and the Caribbean. Gregg joined the Hilton International Development Team in June 2004 as Vice President Development, the Americas, with responsibility for hotel expansion in Latin America and the Caribbean. He continues in this role following the acquisition of Hilton International by Hilton Hotels Corporation in 2006. I would be remiss if I did not mention a person who has assisted in, I would say, defining his life, in particular his wife Anna of 11 years, whom he met in Barcelona, Spain. In my mind's eye, Gregg Rockett is truly a corporate development hotelier extraordinaire. His success with world-class hotel companies and the development of hotels brings pride to our college, and we hope inspiration to all of you, particularly to those aspiring to develop hotels globally. His journey has been most impressive, and I am certain you will enjoy this unique story. So, please listen carefully. I hope you're required to take notes, for I believe Mr. Rockett has much to offer in his remarks on his career journey to date in the hospitality industry with his presentation, My Career in Postcards. Mr. Rockett, thank you for being with us. Would you please welcome warmly one of our very own, Mr. Gregg Rockett.
Wow. Ooh, I'm as nervous as heck. After that, I hope I live up to an introduction like that. Thank you, Dr. Rapol, and I am really humbled to be here. This was a great, excuse me a second, that was quite an introduction, thank you. This was a turning point in my career and in my development coming to the Hilton College, and it's truly an honor to be here amongst all of you and share a little bit about my story. It's been a pretty remarkable 20 years, and I remember putting this together and thinking to myself, geez, I did all of that? Unbelievable. And saw some pretty interesting sights and lived in some pretty interesting places and traveled to some pretty interesting destinations in those 20 years. I'm glad to share this with you, but I wanted to make this a little bit something more than a this is my life type of presentation. I thought I'd do something a little bit more interesting, add a little color to it. As you can see, there's a lot of color on the first slide. But I also collect hotel postcards and tend to focus on icons as my collection develops. And many of the hotels that I've collected postcards from have actually been fundamentally important to the establishment of the hotel industry in many countries and many cities. And also important to my career. So I'm going to use a little bit of my hobby and the history of the industry to tell you a little bit about my 20 years. The irony, also at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the critical factors that have helped advance my career. Some of those you'll see as evidenced in this presentation, but also some not so evidenced in the presentation. We'll talk about those at the end. But I think the irony of my being here today after 20 years of graduating from the Hilton College is that I didn't actually intend to be in the hotel industry. In high school, I had my sights set on being accepted to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, following the footsteps of my dad and my grandfather, and where my mom worked at the time. She was a nurse at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and I was also a candidate for a sports scholarship, and thought that I had my career plans already laid out for me, but my high school guidance counselor had a different idea. He said, you know, Greg, it looks like everything's pretty rosy, but these grades you have here probably aren't going to cut it for you at the University of Pennsylvania. But I said, grades, schmades, you know, I've got it all laid out for me. I'm sure I'll make it. But he convinced me to have a plan B, have an alternative, a backup, just in case it didn't work out. And at the time, as Dr. Rapol mentioned, I was living in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, where I lived most of my life before going to college, and worked at a hotel restaurant where there was a Purdue University student, and I sat down and spoke with her, chatted a little bit, learned a little bit about what Purdue University and the hotel industry was as a career, and she gave me some ideas about what my plan B would be. As it turned out, and as you probably have guessed to this point, I didn't make it to University of Pennsylvania, and I went off to West Lafayette, Indiana, spent 2 years at Purdue, And while there, got started working in a number of positions in hotels and restaurants. I got a lot of experience in those first 2 years working in food and beverage, fast food mostly, but also in the Union Club, which is a hotel in the Purdue Memorial Union. The Purdue Memorial Union was a center of activity for students and life at the university. I worked there as a front desk manager and as a assistant night auditor, and also in housekeeping from time to time. And I did work a variety of jobs, tried to get as much exposure to the industry as I could early on, not only because I was hungry for it, but also had to pay the bills and needed to make my way through college, paying a lot of it out of my own pocket. So a lot of my experience also went to providing for me while I was in college. Somehow Purdue and West Lafayette just wasn't for me. Maybe there was a little bit too much East Coaster in me. Maybe there wasn't enough happening. But I did have the opportunity to do a extracurricular internship type thing where we were invited, a group of 10 of us, down to Houston to do a sales blitz for the opening of the Sheraton Crown Plaza, and that's where I was introduced to the Hilton College and the University of Houston. Met the dean at the time, Jerry Latin, and somehow convinced myself that there was something better out there than Purdue and West Lafayette, and made the transition to University of Houston. And I'm glad I did, because the move to the Hilton College facilitated a lot more exposure to me, at least I thought, not only through job experience and interaction with local entrepreneurs and local industry leaders and regional industry leaders as well. I got a couple of good internships while I was here, and also did a lot of extracurricular work. You see a picture here of me receiving a check from the owner of a Texas-based Mexican restaurant for which we did a feasibility study outside of class, and he made a donation to the college. And I was starting to get a lot of exposure and understanding of where my career could go. At least I thought I was at that time. I had no idea what my career held for me, but I was at least in a position to have a lot of exposure, and the Hilton College facilitated that. During my 3 years here in the Hilton College, I secured an internship towards the end of that with a firm called Panelker Forster. They, at the time, along with Horwath International, were the leading providers of professional services to the hospitality industry, probably the only two at the time, in addition to audits and accounting services, but also market studies, feasibility studies, that sort of thing. And I worked with Panelker Forster in Houston here for a year as an internship. And that position, that internship, actually helped facilitate for me a job when I graduated from the Hilton College. Before that, and for the 3 months before I graduated, I worked, had the opportunity to do a little bit of temporary part-time work in a very iconic hotel called the Shamrock Hilton. It doesn't exist today, but back in 1985-86, it was slated for demolition. It was in the Texas Medical Center. Had been in the industry for 50 years, a leading hotel and social gathering spot for Houstonians for many years. Because of its demolition, a lot of the employees were defecting to other properties in Houston. They needed part-time temporary people to fill in to keep the hotel living and breathing until they did close it in the summer of 1986. And it was interesting for me because I got my first taste of how an icon in the community, a hotel, can build a sense of community, build an awareness and an importance with other people and a connection with people. Many of the people that were checking in the hotel while I was working my part-time stints at the front desk were there simply out of curiosity because they'd known this hotel for so much of their lives and were afraid that they would be losing something with the demolition of the hotel. But there were also a lot of people checking in because they were they had a sense of sentimentality. There was sentimentality and attachment to the hotel, whether they got married there, or they had a baptismal ceremony there, or they had a mother that went to the Texas Medical Center and they stayed there for some time. But we had a number of people walking off the street asking for such and such a room because it meant something in their life. It was very interesting. But as I said, I left Houston, got my first job in the hotel industry outside of college with Panelker Forster in the Washington, D.C. office. It was a very interesting time. I joined as a feasibility analyst and hotel consultant which meant I was doing studies for either new developments or tourism developments. And that office in particular was uniquely positioned to do a lot of interesting international work because of the proximity of multilateral lending agencies, international institutions, the military, etc. And we did a lot of pioneering, interesting work. But it was also a time when the Willard Hotel, which was an icon on Pennsylvania Avenue near the White House, was reopening. It had opened in 1850, or at least the original hotel on the site opened in 1850. It was a host to many dignitaries and politicians and royalty throughout the years, but closed in 1968 because the hotel at that time wasn't viable relative to the industry and the dynamics of the time. But it was reopening in 1986, and I had a friend that was working for the Willard Intercontinental to open the hotel, and I had a unique opportunity to see the repositioning and the reestablishment of an icon in the city of Washington. This hotel is well known for its Peacock Alley and for the Round Robin Bar, and also is today continues to be the host of many politicians and dignitaries to Washington, D.C. It's right next to the White House. In 3 years with Panelker Forster, working as an analyst, I got my first exposure to the international arena. As I said, we were uniquely positioned to do a lot of international work, and we had assignments with the military in Europe to study the introduction of small transient hotels on their installations, bring their military personnel onto the base rather than having them stay in hotels off the base. And also, I got the opportunity to do market feasibility research and valuations in the Caribbean islands, such as Turks and Caicos, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Aruba, and Jamaica. What was interesting is that sometimes these assignments were not so straightforward. And what do you do when you land on an island where there is nothing and nobody and do a feasibility study for it? It was almost to the extent of bizarre, as many developers were dreaming up projects where tourism had yet to emerge. And here's a picture of me actually doing an interview on one of those islands, trying to get information on the quality and characteristics of tourism on that island so that we could justify the introduction of a hotel. The exposure to the international arena attracted my interest greatly. It was very dynamic, and I wanted a taste of it. Another colleague from the Hilton College that I graduated with in 86 went to Laventhal and Horwath in Las Vegas. The competition doing the same sort of work that I was doing, and they offered him a position to move to Barcelona, Spain, open up an office there with a young pioneering group of consultants. And I encouraged him to take my resume with him with no real expectations, but he managed to get me an introduction to his boss when I was in Europe on one of the military assignments. And before you knew it, I was moving to Barcelona and joining the first office that Hilton International had in Barcelona. Along with the inadvertent detour from high school into the hospitality industry, this was yet another opportunistic and unusual detour in my career. I thought it was very exciting. I was there at a very interesting time for Spain and for Barcelona. The European community was starting to congeal and become an entity. Spain was becoming part of that and celebrating a transformation in of itself. Barcelona was hosting the Olympics in 1992, 3 years after I moved to Barcelona. Seville was hosting the World Expo in the same year, and Madrid was the European capital of culture. So there was a lot of going on. There was a lot of infrastructure development, and there was also a lot of interest in rejuvenating and renewing certain infrastructure and icons in Spain. One of those is the Hotel Ritz in Barcelona, which is a host of many celebrities and many politicians and many important people. It was also a social hangout for Barcelonians or Catalans during its heydays in the early 1900s. And we had the owners of this hotel as a client, a Japanese group that had bought the hotel with the hopes of repositioning it and restoring it to its former glory. So we did market feasibility work and made recommendations as to how they should do that. Having said that, repositioning a hotel like this, an old Grand Dam, in a dynamic city like Barcelona at the time was going to be difficult. There was a lot of new infrastructure development. Here is a postcard that shows the Olympic port. In the background, the Hotel Arts, which is symbol of the dynamism of Barcelona in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and the infrastructure development that was going on in anticipation of the Olympics. This hotel and the port itself are in front of the Olympic Village, where all of the athletes stayed, which later became residential development for middle-income families in Barcelona. And within that context, a hotel like the Ritz Barcelona was going to have a difficult time reestablishing itself, especially since this hotel in the background, the Hotel Arts, which is a Ritz-Carlton hotel today, was bringing a new level of hospitality and hotel keeping to the city. The developer of this hotel was a client of ours, and for whom I did a lot of work in my first 2 years with Horwath in Barcelona. We did a lot of market and feasibility work and valuation work to establish the viability of this hotel and help him get financing for it. Unfortunately, that was a very difficult road, a very challenging path for them. There's a lot of work going on, shortage of materials, shortage of labor. Couldn't get the hotel open on time, although it did open 3 floors to house the first U.S. Dream Team basketball team at the Barcelona Olympics. But it did not open formally until 6 months after the Olympics. This hotel has been quite a success, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But to sum up my 2 years in Barcelona working for Horwath International from 1989 to 1991, it was a very dynamic period that hugely influenced my professional growth, my career, helped me learn a language, helped me understand cultures, but also gave me the opportunity to do a number of assignments that also bordered on the unique and bizarre. Here's another one of our clients from Horwath International. I'm kidding, actually. This is just a character I met on the way, but this is a picture of me in Gibraltar, where we were doing a study for a developer that owned a site in Soto Grande along the Costa del Sol. And they had a site that just couldn't get residential permitting, and that was probably the most profitable use for them. So they asked us to consider what other types of uses would be viable and make sense. And it actually gave me an opportunity to sort of branch out from the hotel industry specifically and learn a little bit more about what other elements contribute to tourism and the development of tourism in a region. One of the uses that we studied for that site was as a cricket pitch. And as a kid from Philadelphia, I didn't know what the heck that was. It gave me an opportunity to learn a whole new aspect of, the tourism business. Also learn a whole new language. I had to learn words like leg before wicket and sticky wicket and overs and cricket, and who knew what that was all about. But also had to reach out to different aspects of the community that I was accustomed to and learn how a cricket stadium could actually contribute to the economic development of some place like the Costa del Sol. It was very interesting. But after 2 years with Barcelona, I transferred to a more dynamic office within the Horwath International network. I moved to Lisbon, Portugal, and actually resided just outside of Lisbon in a community called Cascais, which was part of the Estero coast, very important tourism destination for Europe. It was also the summer playground for European royalty and aristocracy during World War II. And the Hotel Palacio that you see in this picture in Estero was central to the tourism dynamics of that area. It's an icon in Estero. Also played a very important role during World War II. Many British and German spies used to have drinks in the bar here. And that history sort of inspired the hotels playing a part in a movie called On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a James Bond film. The owners of this hotel, local family, would become clients of mine with Horwath and also be a partner of mine when I joined Marriott Madrid some years later. Working in Lisbon with Horwath was very interesting. It gave me a new appreciation for the transformation of old Europe to new Europe. And I think there's nothing more that really epitomizes that transformation than the evolution of this hotel that you see in the background. It's called the Estero Hotel, or was called that. It was an icon on the Estero coastline, not always a beloved one. As you can see, it does in this picture appear to be a bit of an eyesore. It did establish itself in the beginning years of Estero's development in tourism, but later, because of dilapidation and problems with functionality, the hotel would be razed, it would be demolished, and currently today they're rebuilding this to be a small deluxe hotel that also has some resort residential condominiums as part of it, probably more in keeping with the modern tourism of today and the establishment of the Estero coast as a more modern tourism destination. Being in Portugal at that time was interesting because the European Union was trying to share the wealth, so to speak, and embrace smaller countries like Greece and Portugal, underdeveloped countries like Italy and Greece and Portugal and Spain, and a lot of money that was sent out through structural funds and grants into the European community from the European Union powers that be wound up in Portugal to help build infrastructure, but also to their small and medium-sized enterprises so they could get an opportunity to work in the broader arena that was in Europe. And my office was a beneficiary of many of those funds, not directly, but clients of ours were getting grants and monies to help study new products, to help reestablish aging infrastructure. And one of those unique assignments was in Slovakia. At the time that I was living in Europe and working for Horwath in Lisbon, Czechoslovakia was being broken up between the Republic of Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And I happened to be doing some work there at the time that they broke up these two countries. It was kind of interesting because for one day you've got currency, and then the next day you got to go to the bank and take this currency and have them put a Slovak stamp on it so they knew it was Slovakian currency. It was unusual how they dealt with the breakup, but even more important was, Slovakia was very underdeveloped, and we had an assignment to help the state of Slovakia find a way to put a ski resort back in private hands out of public ones. And they developed a lottery system in which they would sell shares to the general public, essentially the community, to be beneficiaries and owners of this resort. And our work as a market and feasibility assignment and valuation to help underwrite the value of what that was worth and how much they would sell the shares for. But we weren't able to actually work in the best of circumstances at that time. You see, Slovakia didn't have any hotels, at least not a lot of them anyway. Most people working in Bratislava, which is where this picture is taken, the capital, were staying in Vienna, driving into Bratislava, doing the work, and then driving back to Vienna. And the budget that we had for this study didn't allow that. We had to find some sort of makeshift accommodation, so we actually lived on a boat for a week to do our study. This was actually called the Botel. I spent 4 years in Portugal, first with Horwath, then with Deloitte. I also had as clients Marriott International when I was working with both in Barcelona and Lisbon, and I also had a lot of friends, network contacts that I cultivated during the time I was with PKF in Washington. And that access to people in Washington at Marriott International helped me get an interview with the Vice President of Feasibility, and I flew to Washington, met him. The skills that I had learned living and working in Europe were very attractive to them and appealing to them in establishing an actual feasibility person dedicated to Latin America and the Caribbean. And it would be the first position in Washington, D.C. in their offices that would actually focus on the international environment. And in 1986, I took a job with Marriott as their Director of Feasibility for Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a picture postcard of the Plaza Hotel, which the time that I joined Marriott was the only hotel that Marriott had in South America. They also had a handful of other hotels in Mexico and the Caribbean, but it wasn't a lot. And Marriott was on a growth expansion strategy internationally. I played a central role in that, developing a department that would help grow Marriott from the handful of hotels that I mentioned and the one that they had in South America to about 35 by the time I had reached my 6th year with Marriott. Many of the new hotels that we added were brand new hotels, modern construction that would set a new standard for international branded hotel project in the Latin America region. Here's an example of it. The Costa Rica Marriott in San Jose was designed by the renowned Costa Rican architect Ronald Zurcher. In fact, he's probably got his trademark on most of the branded international hotels in Costa Rica. And this hotel actually was fundamental in transforming Costa Rica from a budget-oriented, eco-friendly tourism destination to one that was much more dynamic and worked with incentive groups and individual tourism travelers with a bigger budget. In fact, this hotel, when it opened in 1996, albeit not the first international hotel, actually set a new standard for room rate and tariffs in the country, and by 2001-2002 had the highest revenue per available room of any hotel in Central America, and it lasted until just last year when the Four Seasons opened up in Guanacaste. The contributions that I made to the feasibility group over the 6 years that I worked with them in Washington, together with my involvement in a project to focus on the strategy for rolling out Courtyard by Marriott hotels internationally, helped me to get a promotion with Marriott into their development organization as a vice president of development in Madrid, and I moved there in 2001 to take responsibility for growing Marriott, expanding Marriott's brands in Spain, Portugal, and Italy. At that time, Marriott was building a development presence in Europe to broaden its representation and grow to a critical mass that they already enjoyed in the UK through a partnership with Whitbread. But the European market was going to be a challenge. You see, the operating structure in Europe is different for hotels. It obliges a lot of leases, people taking actual debt positions to guarantee rents over a long-term period, or actually acquiring hotels to establish a presence in a strategic city. They didn't know what a management contract was, which is what Marriott's growth platform was at the time. My objective was to identify conversion or new build opportunities in Barcelona and Madrid, where Marriott didn't have a presence, but also find ways to develop Courtyard by Marriott in places where they did have a presence, Rome, Milan, Lisbon at the time. And it was I got to tell you, it was a difficult task, almost impossible at times, and it was made even more difficult because I moved to Madrid just before the bombings of 9/11, and also witnessed the bombings in Madrid of March 11th, 2004. So it wasn't an easy cycle to endure, but also selling the product that I was selling in a market that didn't accept it made it a lot more difficult. We did have some near misses. One was the potential acquisition of the Ritz Madrid, which was built in 1910 by Alfonso XIII, Alfonso III, King of Spain, through Caesar Ritz. He actually hired Caesar Ritz to help him develop a hotel that would be as remarkable and as iconic as the Ritz in Paris, and Caesar Ritz actually helped him with this. It opened in 1910, and in 2004, Marriott attempted to buy this hotel. We lost out to Orient Express by $5 million, and you think, well, $5 million doesn't seem like a lot when it sold for $125, but there was a lot of baggage that came with this hotel that we weren't really pleased with, and one of those unique characteristics is not only the building, protected building, but everything inside it is protected as well. So in order to modernize the hotel, you had to go through an unbelievable process to actually unprotect an item and then get something else in there, and it was near impossible. The hotel actually had 6 employees that were dedicated to combing carpets and repairing them on a daily basis. We had another near miss, which was the potential conversion of the Hotel Majestic, which is in Barcelona. A family had owned it for 2 generations. Very proud innkeepers. Didn't want somebody else managing the hotel, but were looking for a brand. We tried to negotiate a franchise with them, but we just couldn't come to mutually acceptable terms. They just weren't ready for all of the conditions associated with being part of a larger international family. But that's okay. It's a fabulous hotel. It's located on Paseo de Gracia, which is the shopping street, and Commerce Street that's most famous in Barcelona, and also the site of where most of the Antonio Gaudí buildings are. I got to tell you, the experience in Europe was probably the most difficult in my career. The operating model that Marriott worked with was not a great fit for what I was doing, but we overcame it. We had some successes, and one of those successes, which I didn't have anything to do with while working for Marriott, but which I had something to do with in an earlier part of my career, was the hotel arts, which I mentioned previously. While I was in Madrid, the city of Barcelona was riding a huge wave of growth in terms of tourism to the city, in terms of relocation of businesses. During 2002-2004, this hotel had the highest revenue per available room in the Ritz-Carlton chain. Also had the highest gross operating profit per available room in the chain. Hugely successful. And just after I left, the hotel sold for about 417 million euros, almost €1 million per room, and was also the largest single asset transaction in Spain at the time. In January 2004, another long-term contact of mine from the industry introduced me to the president of the Americas for Hilton International. And subsequent discussions with him got me a new job with Hilton International, the company that now work with and is now part of Hilton Hotels Corporation. And I moved to Coral Gables outside of Miami to be Vice President of Development for Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a return to the region that I first got started in. It was exciting for me. And this picture postcard that you see here is the Caribe Hilton, which is a fundamental start for Hilton outside the United States. It was the first international hotel for Hilton. It was opened in 1949, and it's been a flagship for Hilton, not only in the Caribbean, but pretty much worldwide ever since. You might know that the pina colada was invented here, and we sell an awful lot of them. Give you a short history of the Caribe Hilton. As you can see, since its opening in 1949 with 300 rooms, it's morphed into something a lot bigger, about 650, and was part of a plan by the Puerto Rican government to industrialize the island through a project called Operation Bootstrap. The Puerto Rican government owned it until Hilton bought it in 1998, and over the next 2 years, this hotel will undergo a $40 million renovation that will restore it to its former prominence in Puerto Rico and in the Caribbean. Hilton is rooted in hospitality history, as you know. It's the namesake of this college. It's probably the world's best-known hotel brand. And the landmark Waldorf Astoria is a testament to the chain's legacy and a staple of the brand since Conrad bought a controlling share in this hotel in 1949. The first Waldorf Astoria was actually 2 hotels, a Waldorf and an Astoria, on Fifth Avenue at the site of the existing Empire State Building. The new hotel was then moved to Park Avenue in Manhattan in 1931, and at the time was the world's largest and tallest hotel. The Waldorf salad was invented in the original Waldorf Astoria hotel, and the Empire Room of this hotel started the careers of Frank Sinatra and Diana Ross. In January 2006, Hilton Hotels Corporation announced the launching of an extension of the Waldorf Astoria brand through the acquisition of management contracts at 3 other hotels in the United States, and thus became an institution extended to the rest of the United States and hopefully the world. That would be the start. That would be the start of the revitalization of Hilton, which also included the purchase of Hilton International, the company that I worked for at the time, by Hilton Hotels Corporation. The two companies have been separated for 40 years. The company that I joined was actually based in London and had the rights to Hilton outside the United States. By consolidating the two for the first time in 45 years, it really put Hilton back in a position to be the leading hotel company in the world. And the rejuvenation of Hilton is evidenced by the renovation of this icon in Beverly Hills, the Beverly Hilton, which is close to our headquarters in Hilton Hotels Corporation. This hotel opened in 1955, and the opening GM would not let any guests come to the property until he had lived in and tested each of the rooms himself personally. And he even actually employed scientists from UCLA to check the acoustics between the walls to make sure that the soundproofing was appropriate. This hotel is unbelievable icon in Beverly Hills. It hosts 175 red carpet events every year, including the Golden Globes. So that's where we are up to this point. 20 years later, here I am to tell you about what I've accomplished, and maybe want to revisit some of the critical success factors that helped facilitate the advancement of my brief 20 years to date. I think probably one of the most important, you probably recognize that early on in my presentation, is to be hungry and to build on your experience. I probably, before I left college to embark on that first job with Panel Per Forster, worked no less than 12 or 15 different jobs to get an exposure that helped me understand where I was going to fit in best, but also to make sure that I was right and fit in well into the hotel industry. Tried everything from night audit to banquets to, I also did a number of internships that helped me understand the mechanics of hotels. I did an engineering internship, I did sales blitz. It was a lot of fun, but more importantly, I think, is networking. Over the last 20 years, I've made a lot of friends, I've met a lot of people. A lot of former Hilton College students helped me advance my career, and I can't say enough for keeping a good network of friends and industry companions that you can rely on to help you get through your career. It's very important. Also important, I think you'll see this happen a lot in my career, is to capitalize on opportunities and rebound from adversity. You may have a fixed idea what you want to do, but there's also other opportunities out there. When they come knocking, you should really give it a chance. Give yourself an opportunity to learn something new and take advantage of it. I had the good fortune of having a lot of opportunity knocking at my door, and I did capitalize on it and take advantage of it, and took me to places like Barcelona and Lisbon and London, and helped me meet my wife as well. More importantly, don't be complacent. Take risks. Broaden your horizons. I had no idea what was in store for me by moving to Barcelona, but I think that was, after becoming a student at the Hilton College, one of the others, the second most important transition that I made in my career. Really gave me a unique set of skills, helped me learn a couple of languages. I speak Spanish and Portuguese. Gave me a foundation for understanding cultures and being able to relate to how business is done in international markets. So those, for me, are probably the most important and most evident critical factors in the advancement of my career. But what also might not be so evident from this presentation is what I think one of the most important, and that's maintaining integrity. Developing relationships of trust with people, clients, business associates, and colleagues is probably one of the most fundamental principles of being a good business person and being a good professional. I can't underestimate or understate the importance of being a person of high integrity and maintaining trust with everyone that you work with. But also, and I think as this picture might demonstrate, it's not all about work. You know, the hospitality industry is a very challenging industry. It makes us work long hours. We often forget that we have a life outside of work, but it's important to balance your life. As you can see, I'm trying to do a little bit of that myself in this picture. But it is important. Get out, do other things. Don't be controlled by your job, and enjoy life a little bit. So, here I am 20 years later telling you about it, and it's been a great privilege. And I really appreciate all of you being here today and making me feel welcome and learning a little bit about what's brought me to this point. But one thing that I want to close with is I mentioned networking and how important it is. This year we started a pioneering chapter of the Hilton College Alumni Association in South Florida, myself and a few other former students. And a year later, that initiative is having an impact around the United States beyond our expectations. It's a small initiative in South Florida. We have to work at it, but it's also meant a lot of interest in other places like New York and Los Angeles, Austin and Dallas, where students want to get together, network, improve their professional position. And there are a lot of schools that do that. I don't think historically Hilton College has done that well. I'm hoping that's going to change in the next few years, and you'll have an opportunity to participate in that. So before you leave the Hilton College, make sure that you find out wherever it is that you're going, if there is a chapter there, try and help participate, make the college better, create more awareness for it, and help us attract equally bright students as yourselves back to this university and make it a great Hilton College. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to interacting with all of you more today. And despite the fact that Dr. Rapol says I'm a nice person, don't hesitate to introduce yourself to my wife, because she's a lot nicer than me. So thank you very much.
If you all can, 5 minutes for questions. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand, and Mr. Rockett will be glad to address it.
Hi, could you tell me your name first?
My name's Edith, and my question is about development in Latin America right now. What is your biggest challenge?
That's a great question, Edith. I think probably the biggest challenge developing in Latin America is money. I was talking with Dr. Bowen and Dr. Rapol this morning. We were talking about, the initiatives that they have for attracting students, and some of the places Dr. Bowen has visited where it just appeared there was a huge disparity of wealth, and certainly the case there. There's a lot of have-nots and very few haves, and not a lot of money being thrown around at hotel projects. You see, to build a 250-room hotel probably takes about $50 million, and that's a heck of a lot of money for a country like Peru or Colombia, Venezuela. So that, as somebody who's out there trying to sell management contracts and not putting any investment in hotel projects, which is what the industry is all about today, that's probably my biggest challenge. Hi.
Hi, I'm Angela.
Hi, Angela.
I was wondering what kept you going all those years, like, just in the industry?
Wow, I hadn't anticipated that question. I wonder what keeps me going today, much less 10 years ago, actually. Because I travel extensively. I think I've done about 120,000 miles on American Airlines just year to date, which is an incredible number. Probably the prospect of learning something new, seeing something new, knowing that even though I've seen probably half the world, there's half the world I haven't seen yet. So that's probably one of the things that keeps me going. Plus the prospect of retiring sometime soon. I got to make money to do that. So that's Good question, though. Thanks. Yes, sir. Hi.
My name is Sean.
Sean, how you doing, man?
I'm excellent, sir. I have a question. You talk about prosperity versus adversity. When you're talking about developing hotels, some of them don't make it, right? How do you handle that?
Just hope you're not around when they fall apart. Yeah. You know, I had a boss at Marriott that said that you had to approach everything with a sense of humor, you know. Sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not. If you're always worried whether it's going to work out or not, you're just going to be totally depressed. So you approach it first with a sense of humor, realize that, you know, you're not getting it right, but you're hopefully getting it close to right. You spend a lot of time and effort understanding the fundamentals and making sure you got that much right. And if it does go horribly wrong, at least you understood the fundamentals and you have an understanding of why it didn't go right, and hopefully apply that to the next deal. But great question, Sean. Thanks. And nice to see you again. Hi.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I had a question. Over the years doing your feasibility reports and things, have you found that you've started to get sort of a gut instinct, if you will, for things as well as something will work, or is it pretty much still a statistical, who knows what, deciding what will work and what won't?
Well, certainly my job's a lot easier because I have all of that behind me and I've got all of that experience and understand the comparables. Yeah, there's a gut instinct that develops over time. Sometimes you have to suppress it a little bit, especially in the face of something a little bit out of the box and new, and not overreact. Oh, I don't think that's going to work. But to a great extent, the back history of all of these projects that I've done, which are over something like 400, really gives me a good understanding when I hit the ground and I see something for the first time. There is a lot of gut instinct and gut reaction to that. Yes, sir.
When you were here, Greg, did you plan on going overseas, or was it networking and opportunities that helped move you overseas and then back?
You know, I think I had a little bit of the international chip in my head when I was here. I don't know where I got it from, especially being in Philadelphia, which is one of the most provincial places I know. That chip just doesn't develop. You know, when I did come to Houston, I was surrounded by a much more international crowd than you would be in West Lafayette, Indiana. It's not a criticism of West Lafayette. It's a testament to, you know, what Houston attracted at the time. I don't think I really developed that yearning to be abroad or understand the global stage until I got to Washington, to be honest. But certainly got a taste of it here. I can see there's a melting pot in this room right now, so the tradition continues.
I'd again like to thank you very much for you'd all just be patient. A couple of things. Well, one, I do have a couple of questions for the class, as also maybe for Mr. Rockett. Does anyone know what Conrad Hilton called the Waldorf Astoria? Anyone in class? This is the Conrad and Hilton College of Hotel and Restaurant Management. You should all know this. He called that the greatest of them all. And two, who was the first manager of the Waldorf Hotel in New York City? Does anyone know? I'll tell you why I know. I come from northern New York up on the St. Lawrence River, and there's a castle called Bolt's Castle. And the first manager was George C. Bolt. And that's another good quiz question. With that,
I'm never going to play you a trivia.
if you would be kind enough to come back up again.
Oh, great.
We have,
I love plaques.
well, we hope you do.
Don't have enough of them.
It says, again, congratulations,
Thank you very
Conrad and
much.
Hilton College, University of Houston, Gregory Rockett, Eric Hilton Distinguished Chair Alumni Series, November 2nd, 2006. Signed by the Dean of the College and myself. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You aren't allowed to stand, you're not allowed to sit down yet. And you have to look straight out at the audience. You can't look anyplace else but straight out at the audience. We're playing a game of trust. Have you ever played that game of trust? And again, management, trying to build a team.
Yeah. Aren't you supposed to be 2 paces back where I fall forward?
Well, we're going to ask you to do that very thing.
Okay.
But before, so if you would step back, don't look. Okay, sit down. That's the chair for you.
All right. That's beautiful.
And with that, thank you all very much for being with us. And would the former Eric Hilton Distinguished Chair lecturers please come up? Thanks so much for being with us. Please come this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We would like you to thank us.
It was great fun. Very nice. Very good. Very nice.